Phantom Revenge releases on December 5th. Now, despite having revenge in the name, this set is not a Battles of Legends set, although I guess they ran out of types of revenge to name those after, so maybe that wasn't so confusing. And unlike Phantom Rage, this set does not at all relate to the Phantom Knight archetype similar to Phantom Nightmare, but also unlike both of them, this isn't a core set. It is in fact a deck build pack, even though deck build packs normally are named in such a way to denote a group of some kind, Justice Hunters, Crossover Breakers, Valiant Smashers, because similarly to Genesis Impact having to drop Impactors, when this set was localized, someone on the English team spoke up and said Revengers is a stupid word that no one actually uses. Thus concludes a tangent that I at least find far more interesting than any of the cards we're about to talk about. Here's everything you need to know. Every Enneacraft monster can reveal itself from hand any number of times to summon any monster from hand face down, but lock you to only special summoning face down for the turn, and in the scale they get a counter that hopefully will have a less stupid name by the time this comes out every time a monster is flipped up. The level 1s in the scale can pay 9 to reveal 3 Enneacrafts and randomly get 1. Orgia can flip itself up in response to a monster effect in hand to search an Enneacraft card, and when it's flipped it mandatorily pops an opponent's monster. Alzonia flips up and searches in response to a search effect, and when it's flipped mandatorily banishes a random card from your opponent's hand. Ocneria flips up and searches in response to an effect engrave or banish, then mandatorily shuffles up to 3, and Tremoria flips up in response to an effect that specials and mandatorily negates a monster. Hold on to that one for me. The 9s share a scale effect that lets them kill an opponent's monster with less attack than they have at the end of the battle phase. Archetype flips itself up in response to an effect that would destroy a card to protect all monsters and all Enneacraft spells from destruction for the turn, and after being flipped up, pings for 9 every time a monster is sent to the grave. Astapixia flips up to negate a targeting effect and banish a random card from your opponent's hand, and then stops your opponent from targeting pretty much anything for the rest of the turn. Izalian flips up when your opponent responds to you to bounce 3 cards and pings for 9 each time your opponent searches, and Ataramar flips up when your opponent activates a card or effect on the field on your turn, negates and destroys it, and when it's flipped up, Floodgate trap holes the whole board. Release places in an Enneacraft pen, and on a later turn can banish itself from grave to add back an Enneacraft from extra. Reverth can shuffle back Enneacrafts from hand or field to draw that many, and can banish itself from grave when your opponent summons to either summon a craft from hand face down or flip up a face down craft. An Enneapolis can bounce any number of crafts you control, can bounce a craft or move it to the scale when it's flipped up, and during the end phase removes all counters and doinks your opponent for 9 for each counter. This deck tries its darndest to create an entirely new axis of play for a flip-based control deck to operate on, but still falls short in a lot of key areas. For one thing, your main turn 1 setups are consistent enough, but somewhat below par. Or above par. If this were golf, it's the bad one. While we're talking about golf, have you ever looked up what Tiger Woods' first name is? It's Eldrick. Eldrick Woods. Since every level 1 can search everything by revealing 3 copies, you can use Orgia to search Alzonia, Alzonia to search the field spell, and then bounce them both to hand to set for a pop and a hand rip. And their effects to set your whole hand to flip monsters without even having to reveal what you're setting lets you use one of them repeatedly to set whatever else you have, and then use your normal set to keep it a 50-50 chance you're bluffing what the last one is. Adding any additional search to this combo can get you to both Scales and Reverth to mallet for 1 or 2, and set up the Grave effect to either make immediate use of the crafts you search on your opponent's turn, or have more freedom on when to trigger your flip effects. But therein lies the issue with most of the crafts, that being their odd and often disjointed timing. Alzonia suffers the least from this, flipping up just in time to take a shot at ripping the card your opponent just searched. Orgia can attempt to kill a monster that just summoned itself from hand, or maybe the fusion that Phimina just summoned, but he's the most likely to want to skip ahead with Reverth so you can threaten any summon. But then Ocneria can only remove cards from your opponent's grave after one of them has already resolved. Too late to stop something from reviving itself, but right on time to, I don't know, deploy to the Middle East probably. And then there's Tremoria, and thank you for holding that one for me, because this one is so annoying for the 30 seconds that you care before you go back to thinking about anything else. If you use Tremoria to flip itself in response to an effect that special summons, what you then want to do is negate the monster your opponent just summoned. But since all the flip effects are mandatory, Tremoria will trigger on Chain Link 1 before your opponent's monster. So unless you're going after an ignition effect or a monster being summoned yet another chain ahead, it's going to be really difficult finding a time to use him as actual disruption. And speaking of not disruption, let's talk about the unemployed bums in the attic. The level 9s are really beefy forms of protection for your board, be it by land or by sea, letting you secretly add targeting and or destruction protection to your board before you even start playing by setting them with the effect of the level 1 you're going to start searching with. Leon and Ataramar can both massively punish your opponent for trying to interact with you, giving the deck its best chance at breaking a board, and in concert with Reverth, Ataramar can be your single strongest disruption, even resetting your non-1 once per turn flip monsters to be used again. But they're also really bricky. They do nothing on their own, so you'd really prefer them as flex 1-ofs, but you can't really flex 1-ofs with your bingo-ass consistency. The only one you can justify playing the full 3 of is Ataramar, if for no other reason than drawing him as your only hope of going second. This issue also extends to the field spell, which does nothing on its own, but performs too critical of a function to your turn 1 play that you can't cut it to any less than 3. And you know, I guess we should talk about the burn. This deck tries to sidestep the issue of face-down monsters not really being able to, win the game, by instead keeping track of the amount of the deck's gimmick you've done and proportionately rewarding you at the end of the turn, like slowly mining your opponent's health bar for Bitcoin. What's annoying though is that the cards that keep track are the scales that you'd really just like to shuffle away with Rebirth to try to draw non-engine like Eclipse or Daruma, so the burn win con can be as slow to start as just getting to a position where your level 9s can start swinging. So like it or not, you're gonna have to play a pretty protracted grind game, despite the deck not really being able to snowball into a stronger and stronger position each turn, or even effectively recover consistently. I mean, this is a pendulum deck with only one way to retrieve cards from the face-up extra. If your board is broken, you might end up with a bunch of your cards trapped in super hell. But while we're thinking about the extra deck, being completely locked out of it doesn't have to be all bad. One of the slightly more successful builds of this deck capitalizes on not needing the extra or the normal summon with Megazaborg, who can rip half your opponent's extra, and now has the option to set up 2 Jurak Astro activations to really give your board that extra punch it needs to simplify game states down to its level. And following a similar lead, some have pointed out that by tribute summoning Gap, you can forcibly flip up your own guys to speedrun the necessary 9 counters to do 8,000 damage turn 1. Or more accurately, since it's 2 scales, you just need 5 on each, which would mean that if you're doing this, it would always be 9,000, so you still kill through Upstart, I guess. Which you damn well might need, because Gap is a lot harder to search than Zaborg, who at least has a Tachyon line if you want him that bad. But anyway, I think this deck is lacking in pretty much every area to really function as a control strategy, even though it went so far to try to fix as many problems as it could find. The Hecahands are illusions, and they've all got the gimmick effect. We're still doing this in 2025. Hecahands Yadel can shuffle itself back from hand to search a Hecahands back row, and resets one when it hits the grave. Ibtel can shuffle itself to summon a Hecahands from deck, and reborns one when it hits the grave. Gygas, Breus, and Goddess can summon themselves from hand when your opponent adds a card. Gygas can check the top 3 of your opponent's deck for a monster to summon to your field. Breus can look at 1 card from their hand and summon it if it's a monster, and Goddess can summon a monster from their grave on your opponent's turn, but banish it when it leaves the field. The hidden Hecahands can search a Hecahands monster, and if you sent a card from field as cost, can then set a Hecahands back row, and can banish itself from grave to make your opponent draw 1 and discard 1. Tartarus can either bounce a back row if you control a Hecahands, or fusion summon a Hecahands by banishing from field or grave, treating any monster you stole from your opponent as a Hecahand. Ebal Hecahands and Yadal Hecahands are counter traps that negate monster effects or spell traps, respectively, destroy them, and then can steal them. Hecahands Jawza is a fusion of a Hecahand and an illusion that can be summoned by tributing an illusion and any stolen monster, and can add a Hecahand from deck or grave every turn. And Hecahand Xeno is a fusion of 3 Hecahands that can quickly look at 2 random cards in your opponent's extra and summon one of them, and if it's destroyed by your opponent's card effect, you can steal all your opponent's monsters. Moving from a somewhat complex deck to a fairly simple one, this deck has a much more standard gameplay loop. Yadel searching hidden gets you Ibtel as well as one of the traps in exchange for a random card on field. You can get a Fall Guy for this cost by setting a random card from hand, even a monster, since the deck doesn't have much use for its normal summon, or by starting with Apprentice as the search for Yadel. Ibtel can then summon Gygas, who has the best chance to find a monster to steal, since Breus only has 1 shot, and Goddess can't do it on your turn at all. Assuming you hit like a Charmy or something, you can fuse it with Gygas into Jawza to search the other trap for a kind of unremarkable 2 negates. But let's say you draw Breus, well then you get to use Hidden's effect in grave to let your opponent fix their hand, but also trigger Breus to summon itself. Take a chance on ripping a monster from their hand, then use Jawza to search Tartarus, and link off your board to fuse names in grave and the stolen monster on field into Xeno. Xeno's random extra deck rip can be a nothing burger if you just hit some utility card like Nightmare Phoenix, but can just as easily be an insane free upgrade to your board like Herald. With 2 checks per activation, you know you're never forced to take the worst card in their extra deck, and with 2 tries per turn cycle, you have a solid chance to at least manage to annoy your opponent with your take. And if my comments are anything to judge by, I'm sure everyone in my audience would absolutely love to annoy an opponent with their take. Since Jawza can search anything, Ibtel works just as well as a starter by making Jawza to search hidden and getting to Yadel at the end of the combo. But because of some quirks of its summoning condition, there's also some other ways to make Jawza that can get your plays going. Using Sengenjin, you can set up Zombie Vampire to check the top 4 of both players' decks for either a Gygas or more likely a monster to steal from your opponent, so you can link off Vampire with Golem into Rabbit and fuse the Rabbit with your opponent's monster into Jawza. In this line, you even get Wedju left sitting on the field to send as cost for hidden, so it can search Yadel in one of the traps. And on top of consistency, the deck can also grind pretty well since all of its consistency tools morph into grind tools after turn 1. Ibtel summoning Yadel to link off gets you a trap back from grave, and Jawza after surviving a turn with his Illusory Battle Protection, can start adding back from grave as well. But while this deck has good consistency and grind, and the interruptions themselves are nothing to scoff at, on its own it's a little too weak to support a full deck. As a compact engine, it can fit quite elegantly into Chimera as a search for Gazelle. Jaza can be made under the fusion lock, and oftentimes you won't mind sacking the fusions for hidden, since all they really care about is getting into the graveyard somehow. The size of the engine may be a point of contention though, because as you might expect of any use of these cards, having to play 2 bricky trap cards is a tough sell. And I mean, you want to talk about it? What if Gygas misses? Like, it's definitely better than the other two, but like, what if, right? Lol. And furthermore, what if you hit something your opponent will benefit from you tributing for Jaza? Imagine like Graph, or what are the kids like these days? Saji. These are all just little problems the deck's gimmick introduces that might screw up what's otherwise a pretty consistent combo. All the Kewl Tunes are tuners that can use a tuner in hand as material when they're used to Synchro Summon. Kewl Tune Rico is a level 3 Fire Fiend that searches a non-level 3 Kewl Tune on summon and pops a back row when it's synced off. Mix is a level 2 that searches a non-level 2 and pops a monster when it's synced off. Clip can summon itself during your opponent's turn and immediately Synchro Summon a tuner, and when he's sunk can randomly banish a card from your opponent's extra deck. And Kewl Tune Q can summon any tuner from hand, deck, or grave on normal, but lock you to tuners, and if it's synced, can look at your opponent's top 2 and banish one of them. Kewl Tune Synchro searches a Kewl Tune, then can immediately Synchro Summon, but locks you to tuners, and randomly can be used 2 times per turn. JJ gives you an extra normal for a tuner, contribute a tuner to search or summon a Kewl Tune from deck, and while your opponent has a tuner, Loudness War gains 33. Playlist bounces a Kewl Tune from field or grave to apply its effect when it's synced off, but locks you to tuners. All the synchros require only tuners as material, or at least a specific name that just so happens to be a tuner plus more tuners. Trackmaker is a level 4 that adds a Kewl Tune card on summon, and bounces a card when it's synced off. Remix is a level 5 that requires mix, gains 15 while your opponent has a tuner, and can tag out during your opponent's turn to add a tuner back to hand, summon another one, then immediately synchro summon a tuner. RS requires Rico, gains 3 for each tuner in the trash, increases the level of all your opponent's monsters with 1700 or less by 1, and can banish a tuner from grave to quick negate a card on field. And Kewl Tune Loudness War protects all your other tuners from targeting and destruction, and in response to an opponent's card, can banish a Kewl Tune to copy its material effect. This deck shows a lot of promise. With a bunch of flexible starters and malleable disruptive sequences, there's plenty of ways to build a decent board with this deck. Starting from Q, you of course have the option to summon Mix or Rico immediately to make one of the 5s or Loudness War, but you'd much prefer to make Trackmaker to get a search for anything and set up a valuable material effect, which is where the generosity of Q comes into play, letting you access any level 1 tuner while we await the announcement of one in Archetype and Blazing Dominion in like a week or 2. And while it would be such a rip-roaring good time to go through an entire subgenre of Yu-Gi-Oh card to laugh and cry at as many half-baked ideas as a grown distant white boy can dream up, in studying I've learned that man is mortal, so let's get the poison out of here and skip to the important part. From what we can tell, the best tuner to summon with Q is Red Nova, whose effect is always on in this deck because you're always using 2 or more tuners, and can summon Rico from deck, netting you a search with Trackmaker, a level 3 body, a snipe off the top to chain block them, and then a search for Mix or Clip. By searching the field spell, you can use that searched Mix with your extra normal to search another 3, or trade the Rico on field for a Mix from deck, giving you several different options to make Remix or RS, while holding resources in hand or on field to synchro with on your opponent's turn. But typically you'll just search Synchro, which nets you an additional resource and another opportunity to sync off on your opponent's turn. Similarly, you'll often find yourself ending on Remix instead of RS to recur resources like Clip or even Ashes and Veilers, get a body that searches back to field, and then sync off to trigger your pops, bounces, and snipes. As a quick play searcher, Synchro is itself a starter that even plays around Droll, and as a quick synchro, you can use it to dodge targeting by syncing off whatever your opponent is going after. And here's a fun one: because it's a synchro card, you can search it with Duelist Jedasis, a real play worth considering, because on top of all 3 copies of Kewl Tune Synchro being good to have in hand turn 1, you also have the option to search Synchro Overtake, which can reveal Remix or RS to summon their associated acts. Summoning Mix this way gets you Q to start your bread and butter line with a 2 already in the mix. The end board is, as you might imagine, all about sequencing. Among Clip, Synchro, and Remix, you have 3 chances to trigger your material effects, and all of them only optionally synchro summon, so you can even bluff certain interaction points to force your opponent to respond while holding materials for a better position later. Clip can be used even as early as turn 0 if you draw it alongside Rico or Mix to either pop a monster and search, or pop it back row and then have a negate up. And his own material effect lets you whittle away at your opponent's extra deck, ripping 2 or even 3 cards every turn cycle with Loudness War. Speaking of, Loudness War and Playlist are similar cards that diverge in very key ways. Both of them give you a much more versatile timing to use your material effects, letting you pop or bounce either at detonator speed or just whenever you want. And they also let you repeat the strongest ones so you can pop 2 monsters in a turn instead of just 1. An extra deck monster that for the most part is the only thing you can sink Trackmaker into is a more consistent and flexible part of the board than a trap card, but while Loudness War has to banish and therefore cut you off from one of your names, Playlist recurs that name, extending your grind even further. And then of course there's RS, a brick house of a card that's both a negate and a very finely tuned floodgate. 1700 seems almost precision designed to include Ice Ryziel, which, I mean, funny enough, turns him into a starter for the Valon and the extra. At level 2, the Yummies cease to be valid materials for the level 2 Synchros, and the mirror is all sorts of screwed up, with Q into Red Nova becoming a Loudness War play, and Rico and Mix similarly generating 6 stars instead of 5. And relatedly, all your monsters being so small makes RS also your main tool for doing damage, being able to reach respectable attack stats early and exceptional ones in the late game. Remix and Loudness can get to the 3k range, but only in a favorable matchup or when your opponent has drawn hand traps. Not quite as strong of a punish for Ash as Izuna, but it is what it is. In spite of all that good, this deck hasn't seen much success thus far in the OCG. While it sets up a decent amount of on-brand disruptions, that's sort of by design all it can do, because while it may be unique to synchro summon using only tuners, it's not very conducive to summoning any other synchro monsters at all. You can make Visas Amritra by using multiple slurp juices on a single Trackmaker, so you can add reframing to your board, and on turn 3, after your tuner locks have gone away, you can maybe make a double attacking Prime Heart that doesn't even have targeting protection. So unlike the comparable Yummy deck, Kewl Tune's respectable arsenal of disruptions has to stand on its own with very little room to collab with anything else. But while it may not have inherited Yummy's greatest strength, it did manage to copy its main weakness. Removing this deck's bodies on board puts it in an extremely awkward position that it struggles to extend through. Destroying Q and leaving just the Red Nova on board removes the pesky material from hand effect from the board, forcing something like Overtake or the Field Spell to keep going. And furthermore, even that material from hand effect can be a bit finicky for use as extension. Q can use Veiler in hand to get to Trackmaker, but both 5s require their specific names, so Q and Clip can't make anything. This specific material requirement and jumbled distribution of levels can really be a pain for trying to establish anything into disruption. And so that makes 3 out of 3 decks this time around that have only put up 3 or 4 results in a format still dominated by Justice Hunters and now Mitsurugi. With no salvation in sight from the early support, maybe fans of at least the 2 non-pendulum decks on offer today can look for better prospects in pointier formats that no one plays. Sorry I've been kinda MIA for the last month. I know something weird not that long ago, which is that I sorta don't give a shit anymore. Like, I made that thing last year about how I give too many shits, and then after that, I guess I sort of mellowed out, and now I don't have constant existential anxiety motivating me anymore. This is not the first time this has happened to me. In 2021, I started taking anxiety medication, and the only thing that changed is I stopped doing my homework because I was no longer stressed about what would happen if I didn't. Needed a minute to think about that. I'm good now, I think. Thanks for watching, and if you need something to put on your second monitor now that you're done with this, I heard there's a new Defunct Land